An exclusive BBC investigation has revealed new allegations of criminal sexual conduct by the Hollywood actor Jared Leto. 4 women have accused the Oscar-winning actor and 30 Seconds to Mars frontman of offences including sexual assault, grooming, and statutory rape. In a statement to The Hollywood Reporter after the BBC's investigation was published, Jared Leto said, "I have never sexually assaulted anyone in my entire life. These claims are absolutely and categorically false." The women all say they were teenagers when the alleged offences took place. Today, we tell 3 of their stories. From the BBC, I'm Tristan Redman in London, and this is The Global Story on YouTube. Before we go any further, this episode contains details of alleged sexual offences and misconduct. So please take care while listening. Alice McShane is a documentary director with a background in investigative journalism.
In recent years, I've made films that look into allegations of sexual misconduct or predatory behaviour, often involving high-profile people.
Alice directed the documentary Into Russell Brand that's led to a criminal investigation in the UK. But it was just over a year ago when her team first started working on their latest exposé.
Well, in April last year, we noticed a post going up on Instagram, and it was written by a woman called Ali Teals, and she is based in LA. She's a DJ. And she'd shared on her Instagram story a Facebook status that she'd written back in 2012. And the status read, "You're not really in LA until Jared Leto tries to force himself on you backstage." After she posted that, she started getting a lot of responses. Women started messaging her privately and saying that they'd had similar experiences with him. Ali reposted about 40 private messages with, containing allegations against Jared Leto. So this was quite a significant moment, and we thought we should really start looking into the story.
Well, we're going to come to the women's allegations in some depth with you today, Alice. But before we do that, for our listeners who aren't familiar with Jared Leto, who is he exactly?
Well, he's a big player in Hollywood. He's an actor. And I think he's in his mid-50s now, and he's been around for a long time. It depends how old you are, but I remember him from My So-Called Life, which was a TV drama based in the US. It was set in a high school, and he played the kind of dreamy heartthrob. But sort of since then, he's been in a lot of big movies, Fight Club, Panic Room, Requiem for a Dream in the early 2000s was a big one for him. That really kind of put him on the map, I'd say. But also he has a really successful band.
Whip it up right now, people. It is so good to welcome to the stage 30 Seconds to Mars!
Called 30 Seconds to Mars. And yeah, he's quite unique in that way that he has this kind of dual career as a musician and an actor. I think, it's actually quite rare for somebody to be able to do that and do that successfully.
Okay, so you first came across these stories and allegations about Jared Leto with that post by Ali Teals. Was that the first time that these allegations had emerged publicly?
Actually, no. Allegations against Jared Leto have been circulating for many years. I think the first time anything was published in the sort of more in the mainstream press was 2005. There was an article in the New York Post which alleged that he was approaching teenage models at a hotel in New York and getting their numbers and then texting them. But actually, there's a huge amount of allegations that exist online on forums like Reddit and other social media platforms. And these date right back to the early 2000s, actually. I think we counted 120 allegations.
At that stage, he's already an established actor, but that's already also around the time when his band 30 Seconds to Mars, as you mentioned, really takes off. How much did his moving from acting into music kind of change the way that he was seen by fans around the world and the way he interacted with them?
I think he's always had quite a solid female fan base. But I think what we noticed, his band, they formed in '98. His band is made up of just him and his brother. Their debut album was 2002, but when they really kind of hit the mainstream was in 2005 with this album, A Beautiful Lie, and on that album was a song called The Kill, which was massive. And I think it was at this point that their fan base really exploded, and a lot of the fans at that point were sort of young teenage girls. And he's always had a very close relationship with the fans. They actually refer to themselves as the echelon. And he sort of embraces cult-like imagery around his band and his fan base. And, he really cultivates that connection.
Okay, well, as we've discussed, there have been a lot of online allegations, but the work you have done has brought to light some allegations of people that you have spoken with. Around this time, in 2006, Jared Leto met a woman at a gig. She's called Clara. Can you tell us about her?
Clara is not her real name, and she is anonymized in the film. She was backstage at one of his concerts in 2006. She was actually working there on the merch stand, and she told us that not Jared Leto himself, but an associate of his approached her, and she said this man was in his 40s, and this man told her that Jared was interested in getting her number. He'd seen her from across the room, and obviously she was very flattered by that.
Most young girls saw him very much as a heartthrob, very handsome, great features, professionally very good at what he did as an actor, as a singer. He was a very magnetic person.
She was 17 and saw him very much as a heartthrob, so exchanged numbers, and then they began a sort of texting relationship.
At that age, I had just been coming out of a really awkward time in adolescence. I had always been very, very shy, painfully shy. I'd blush a lot, I'd trip over my words. It was very validating that someone like him would be interested in me at all.
And the first time she met him face to face was when he invited her to Chateau Marmont, which is a sort of exclusive hotel restaurant in Hollywood. And she went and met him there, and he was there sitting at a table with friends.
It's a very kind of secluded upscale place where they cater to a lot of A-list celebrities. So it was intimidating at first going in there.
She says that somehow they started talking about the age of consent in that room.
I had mentioned to him that my dad was in law enforcement, that I knew with certainty that here in California, the age of consent is 18. He just kind of shrugged it off like it wasn't a huge concern for him.
Clara says later they did actually go on to have sex that same day. So this is quite a significant allegation because the age of consent is 18 in California, and the offence is known as statutory rape if a person over the age of 18 has sex with somebody under that age.
How old was Jared Leto at that time?
He was 34 in 2006, so quite a significant age gap.
As time went on, I realized more and more how scary that really was, being that age and being so naive and vulnerable. There is no well-adjusted man in his 30s who's gonna look at a teenager and think, wow, she would be a great partner. The only reason to approach somebody like that is because of how easily manipulated they are.
Leto appears, therefore, to have known that Clara was under the age of consent when he begins that relationship with her. But what really struck me as well about Clara's story was that, according to your investigation, Leto had someone come out and get Clara's number. She met him while she was with other friends. It strikes me as unusual that nobody seems to have said anything about what appeared to be happening in front of them. What do you make of that?
That's actually a theme that's really at the heart of this film. It's about the sort of complicity of Hollywood more broadly, but, the people around an individual like Jared Leto, a sort of wealthy, powerful man. There are, layers and layers of people around somebody like that.
Not a single person spoke up. There were not only just men of his age, but also women. These dozens of people who were traveling with him, touring with him.
She remembers, people that were traveling with him, touring with him, friends around the table.
Not a single one said anything to myself about looking out for him or being concerned about how young I looked hanging around him. Nobody said anything.
And I think it's a really, really important point to highlight, that, the behavior of somebody like Jared is completely enabled by the people around him not speaking up.
So in the 2000s, he sets up this band, which gains more and more success, and he takes a break from acting to really focus on that. He becomes better known around the world. Do the allegations continue after this, Alice?
In the late 2000s and the early 2010s, his band was touring a lot and they were playing massive venues across Europe. And one of the stories that we have in the film, the woman's name is Alex. She was actually invited via her modelling agency to a gig in London in 2013. And this is something that we hear from an insider. Jared would ask crew members to call up the local modelling agencies in the big cities that they went to in Europe and invite models down to the show, and only the female models, not the male models. So Alex went to this concert. She went alone, and she says that after the concert, she was approached by Jared's assistant and invited to an after party. She says she was one of 8 women and Jared there, so it was quite a small select group.
I remember going to the bathroom, and when I came out, he was standing in the corridor.
She said they started having a conversation.
And he says something, and it gets me to say, "Do you know how old I am?" And then he says no, and then I lie, and I say, "I'm 17. At the time, I'm 19.
She says she can't really remember why, but she thinks to sort of protect herself in some way, because she said he'd been behaving quite strangely in the evening up to that point.
I just remember that I felt the need to say that I'm younger than I am. He said, "Age is just a number. And anyway, we're in Europe."
And as the evening went on, she was having a conversation with the assistant, who told her about this other party that was happening after Alex was quite reticent to go. She said her phone was dying and she was feeling a bit drunk. But she said she really felt like she was being nudged to go further and further by this assistant, and was told that the party was in a hotel. So she made her way reluctantly to the hotel, thinking, "Oh, well, there'll be other people there. It will be a party. I'll see if I'll see if it's fun. And if it's not, then I can try and make my way home."
I get into the hotel room. It's really dark. And then I see that it's just him. Weren't there supposed to be other people? And I think he just says, "No, it's just you and I."
And she, immediately felt a bit uncomfortable and wanted to leave, but she didn't have any phone battery and she didn't have any cash. And she was asking him, "Can I get a phone charger?" He said, "No." "Can I get some cash to get a cab home?" And he said, "No." So she said to him, "Can I just sleep here then?" And then she said that he, quite shockingly, threatened her with sexual assault if she was going to sleep there, which he repeated to her several times. And, she was very shocked and in disbelief and started planning her escape and managed to run out of the room.
I texted my then best friend, and she was saying he was threatening sexual assault. "You should report him." And in my head, I was like, nah. I put myself in that situation. He didn't touch me. It was probably a misunderstanding. I was probably the only one. But I'm probably not the only one. And it's probably been a lot worse.
But what she's really left with, and what's very important about this story, is just what a significant role the assistant played, I think, in getting her into that room.
And every time that I had an excuse for not going, I was getting nudged to go further. The assistant knew what to say to lure me into his hotel room. It seemed that it was planned out.
And I think it just goes to show, again, the sort of complicity of the people around him.
Okay, so at this point in our story, in 2013, Jared Leto has taken a break from acting. His band has become a big deal internationally. He's a big deal in Hollywood, but things get even bigger for him when he stars in the film Dallas Buyers Club. He wins an Oscar for that performance in 2014. What happens next, Alice?
Well, yes, I think this was really the peak of his acting career. I think winning an Oscar is the apex for any actor. So he was, absolutely a household name at this point. We speak to a woman called Etta. Etta is not her real name. She was in LA because she was going to an open call at a modelling agency, Ford modelling agency. She was 16 at the time. And she'd gone to this open call with her mum, and they were outside Ford modelling agency when her mum noticed that Jared Leto was standing, to the left of the doors, and he was on his phone. And Etta recalls that he saw them, hung up his phone, and then followed them into the reception area and said that he was talking to them, being sort of friendly and flirty. And it was at that point that he told them that he'd just won an Oscar. And he asked for Etta's email address because he said he was going to send an invite to the party and that she and her mum could both come.
I didn't even consider how weird it was to be invited by a 42-year-old man at 16 to a party.
Did he know you were 16?
I know for sure, if not then, I did tell him a couple of days later when we were texting.
And then after that, she said that to start with, he was just sort of friendly and seemed interested in how she was getting on with her modelling career. Who did you sign with? And, how did it go?
He never would call me without making it a private number. I think he did his best to make sure there was no proof.
But then quite quickly, the questions turned very sexual. He'd ask her things like, are you a virgin? Do you have any kinks?
He did at least once mention him and I having sex at some point.
How did it make you feel, him asking you questions like that?
I remember feeling nervous, a little anxious, a little uncomfortable, but at the time I remember I had a really hard time saying no to things or putting boundaries up.
And then bizarrely, Jared said to Etta, I have a friend and I'd like to give him your number. And said it was something to do with a business venture and it might help your career in modelling. So, Etta was open to that. And then a man started calling her that who said his name was Christian. And similarly, Christian would ask her very explicit questions. And he said that he was a porn producer and wanted to shoot porn with her and told her that it didn't matter that she was underage. And we spoke to other women throughout the course of our research that had quite similar experiences to Etta, these strange phone calls and receiving calls from other men at around the same time. And many of them also believed those men that they were receiving calls from could have been Leto playing other characters. And the last bit of contact that Etta had with Jared was in 2016 when he phoned her up. And he said that his lawyer was worried about his relationships with women and that she would like all the women in his life to sign NDAs. And Etta said he was kind of chuckling about that.
A non-disclosure agreement.
That's right, yes. But Etta said she was willing to have a look at it. So it was sent to her via email. And she said that she read it quite closely, and there was a line in there that worried her a bit. It said that it wouldn't just cover, anything that was said from that point onwards. It would also cover anything that was ever said in the past. So from the date their relationship commenced. So Etta thought that was quite unusual. That she, that anything she'd ever said up to that point, she could be held liable for and potentially sued. So she never signed it.
Okay, so and is that the point at which she stopped having contact with Jared Leto?
That's the last time they ever spoke, yeah.
Okay. Well, you've heard these stories from Clara, from Etta, from Alex. If you zoom out from those testimonies that they've shared with you, what kind of picture do you get of Jared Leto at this point?
I mean, the pattern of behaviour is quite stark with him. What we've been told, he approaches sort of young and underage girls and, engages in grooming behaviour. I think in a lot of circumstances, we've noticed that he is quite conscious of ages of consent in terms of actual physical contact. However, that was not the case with Clara. Clara, back in 2006, she was underage and he appeared to not be too worried about that. But yeah, I think what is most stark is using his fame fame and his access to young women to really, exploit that access. And there's just a huge power imbalance.
We've heard historic allegations like this before in the entertainment industry. And when women come forward with these kinds of accusations, there are inevitably people who question why the women didn't say anything before at the time of the alleged assaults. Why have they decided to come forward now?
I think for a lot of these women, they are incredibly frustrated at the lack of accountability. Jared's career has continued to thrive over the years, despite the allegations that have been swirling around him. But I think that at the time, these girls were young. They were pretty powerless. This was a very powerful, wealthy, famous man. And, I think that they felt that if they were to speak out, they wouldn't be believed, they wouldn't be listened to. And, there's so many feelings of sort of shame and embarrassment and self-blame when things like this happen to you, especially when you're young. So I'm not surprised at all that it's taken this long for these allegations to come out.
What are the potential legal ramifications of all of this for Jared Leto, Alice?
That depends entirely on whether women want to bring a claim against him and also when the offence took place and what it was. But my experience of working on stories like this is that they often bring other women out of the woodwork, and other women feel empowered or compelled to come forward. So who knows? Who knows what might happen? There may be other women that have allegations, potentially more contemporary allegations than we have in the film.
At this point, Alice, we're about 10 years after the beginning of the Me Too movement, which began in the entertainment industry. And you've asked questions in your reporting about whether women who come forward with these kinds of allegations will be listened to or not 10 years after Me Too began. Where have you landed on that?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point, and I think one of the reasons I really wanted to do this story. There's something about our culture at the moment, I think, where the kind of sort of attitudes towards these stories have cooled slightly, or the sort of the outrage has anyway. And I've sort of wanted to explore why that was. There was an article that was published, which contained 9 women's stories about Jared Leto, 9 women's allegations about sexual misconduct by him, and that went live shortly after Ali Teals's post. And that you'd think was a big kind of watershed moment for Jared and his career. But actually, he was on the red carpet, not long after promoting his upcoming movie, Tron Ares. And, he seemed to be completely unaffected by those allegations. So, yeah, 10 years on after Me Too, I feel like in a way, it's almost as if we've regressed. It's quite difficult, certainly more than it was 10 years ago, to really get people to sit up and take notice when allegations like this are leveled at somebody like Jared Leto.
Alice, thank you so much for sharing with us all the work you've been doing on this story. It's been really hard to hear the stories, but it's really important that you share them with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Despite repeated attempts to contact Jared Leto, he hasn't responded to the allegations put to him by the BBC. That was Alice McShane, director of the BBC documentary